As your family members age, they may need long term care. Many people cannot afford this service, so they often have to use Medicaid to help cover these costs. But the Medicaid application process is shrouded in fear and mystery. People are afraid they may not qualify and are even more scared they will lose their assets or inheritance. Luckily, the company's senior planning services helps families fight the anxiety of applying for Medicaid. We are joined by Michael Steinberg, the head of business development for Senior Planning Services. In this episode, he's going to outline what Medicaid it is and what benefits it provides, how to determine if you're eligible, guide us through the application process here in New Jersey, what assets may be claimed by the state, and so much more. Please welcome to Talking Retirement, Michael Steinberg. Thanks for joining us today, Michael.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I'd love to start a little bit with what exactly Senior Planning Services is and what you guys primarily do to help people out.
Sure. So, Senior Planning Services, we are a Medicaid application company. And as you mentioned in your introduction there, many families don't know where to turn or where to start from. Things happen so quickly where their loved one was living at home and they may have had a slip or a fall, land up in the hospital. Now they're in a rehab getting some physical therapy. And then it turns out that their loved one cannot go back home and they need to seek a long-term care facility. And things just happen so quickly. Families are extremely overwhelmed. And we find that the biggest thing and the biggest reason why they're so overwhelmed is because there's a lack of education. And people don't understand truly what Medicaid is, the Medicaid process, what Medicaid can help them with. And we feel that the more we can get out there and educate individuals on the Medicaid rules and guidelines, on the Medicaid process, it can really put people at ease. Yes, ultimately we do Medicaid applications and we take over the burden on behalf of the family. But step number one, like we always like to do, is to educate the families and making sure that they get a good understanding of the Medicaid process, the rules, the guidelines. And there are so many myths out there where families call us and they've told us, they've heard 10 different things about Medicaid. So it's just I guess I call it a privilege where we have the opportunity to really educate those families and put them at ease.
That's great to hear. And I know we've seen with our clients the frustration of applying for Medicaid. So it's really great you guys can step in and help out with that. I know you mentioned in what you just said some myths about Medicaid. What are some of the bigger myths you see when it comes to Medicaid when people first approach you to apply for it?
I mean, especially in a spousal scenario where you have one spouse that's needing long-term care and the other one still living at home. The number one biggest concern that people hear is that Medicaid will take away the spouse's home, which is absolutely not true. Another myth is that Medicaid will take away all my money. Medicaid doesn't go into anyone's account and take money from them. It's a matter of, are you financially eligible and how do you get there? However, Medicaid doesn't have access to your financial accounts. They're not going into your checking or savings account and actually withdrawing funds from there.
Okay. No, it's great. I know a lot of people are really worried about the spend down, and we can talk about that in a second, but it's not so much Medicaid is taking the money out of your account. You're just burning through assets en route to becoming Medicaid eligible, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. So in New Jersey, which we'll primarily focus on because we're NJ Life and Health, we have NJ Family Care. What exactly can people get with NJ Family Care, and specifically NJ Family Care Age Blind and Disabled, which is, I imagine, what you guys focus on primarily, right?
Yes, that is what we focus on.
Okay, so what benefits can someone get once they are eligible for NJ Family Care Age Blind and Disabled?
Okay, so I mean, we'll focus primarily in the assisted living world or long-term care, otherwise known as skilled nursing facility. There are some benefits at home as well, which is home care, but that is very limited, depending on the level of care that the individual needs. But even if they do have a high level of care, they're not going to get that much help. So we'll focus on the assisted livings and the skilled nursing facilities. Once somebody actually does qualify for Medicaid and gets approved for Medicaid, Medicaid will take care of the entire bill at the skilled nursing facility or at the assisted living for the entire life of that individual. The only thing that the individual does need to turn over, which we can get into a little more later on, is their income. There are some, exemptions on that. But for the most part, that individual needs to hand over their income, and then Medicaid fills the gap. So say the monthly bill is $7,000 a month, and they get a monthly bill of they get a monthly income of $1,000. They would give over $1,000, and then Medicaid would pay the remaining. And like I said, there are some exemptions of that income, but that is the benefit of Medicaid. Yes, it's a grueling process to get on there, but the good thing is that once you do get on there, you don't have to worry about paying any of your bills again.
Yeah, it's great to hear, especially with a lot of people needing long-term care for longer amounts of time as life expectancy increases. And you might get older, but doesn't mean your quality of life is necessarily going to be super high. So people need more skilled nursing, long-term care facilities, everything like that. So you just talked about the grueling process of applying for Medicaid. Can you walk us through how this starts? I know in your example in the beginning, you talked about someone's in physical therapy. It's become obvious that person cannot take care of themselves by themselves anymore. How does this process start in the beginning?
Okay, so there's really a few criterias for an individual to qualify for Medicaid. We'll start with the simpler ones. So number one, it's not only about assets and resources. It starts before that. Somebody needs to qualify clinically for Medicaid as well. So just because somebody runs out of money, it doesn't mean they automatically qualify for Medicaid. There's something called ADLs, Assistance with Daily Living. And there are 5 ADLs, and an individual would need would need assistance with 3 out of the 5 ADLs. So just to give an example, if somebody does walk with a walker, because they are a fall risk, chances are they would qualify clinically for Medicaid because 3 of the ADLs are bathing, dressing, and transferring. So if you walk in with a walker, you need help walking. You don't want to be taking a shower on yourself by yourself because you are a full risk, and then dressing as well. We don't want you to fall while you're putting your socks and shoes on. So that's more of the simpler criteria, where that's basically what we call the pass, where we have a nurse. A nurse comes down to evaluate the patient, and once they do pass that evaluation, then they do qualify for Medicaid on a medical basis. You also need to be above the age of 65 unless you are blind or disabled. And you need to be a U.S. citizen or a legal resident here for more than 5 years. So those are some of the more simpler things to qualify. Jumping into the financial piece, and we could focus on a single individual first, just because that's a lot easier to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
But for a single individual to qualify for Medicaid, their total assets and resources need to be below $2,000. And what many people confuse right from the get-go is, well, just my Social Security and my pension alone are over $2,000. So we need to separate the two. There's something called income, which is something that's coming in on a monthly basis. There's no cash value. You cannot cash out your Social Security benefit. It's something that's coming monthly. So that is not looked at when we talk about assets and resources. What we are referring to is cash in the bank, checking, savings, money market, stocks, bonds, annuities, some life insurance policies, things that have a cash value. That's what Medicaid is looking at. So all that needs to be below the $2,000 mark, and it needs to be below $2,000 prior to the beginning of the month. So for example, today is May 1st. If somebody needs Medicaid benefits for the month of May, they would have needed to be below $2,000 as of yesterday.
Yeah, and that's a pretty low hurdle to clear. A lot of people, even in abject poverty, have over $2,000. So I imagine it's tough to get to that point. So basically, for simplicity's sake, you have to pass the physical part first, where you have to not be able to do 3 of the 5 ADLs, the activities of daily living. Then after that, you start looking into the financial picture to see if you financially qualify, correct?
Correct.
With the financial picture, it seems like the physical picture is a little bit easier because it's pretty cut and dry. With the financial picture, do you ever look at someone and say, "Hey, you have $50 or $100,000 worth of assets. We're going to help you spend it down," or how does the process work if you're physically there but you're not necessarily financially there?
Okay, yes. So we'll take a step back for a moment, because even somebody is currently below the $2,000 mark. It's not as simple as just going to the Department of Social Services. That's where we submit the applications to. It's not as simple as just going to them and say, "Hey, look, I only have $1,500 in all my accounts. Give me Medicaid." Medicaid says, "Okay, I see you only have $1,500, but how did you get there? Maybe 6 months ago you had $1 million and you gave it away to your children, and now you're coming to me for Medicaid." So Medicaid has what's called a 5-year look back, where if somebody needs Medicaid as of today, May 1st, 2024, Medicaid goes back 5 years, and they want to see every single account, every single transaction, every single statement that has occurred over the past 5 years. And they really go through that and every single statement to ensure that every dollar that was spent for the benefit of the applicant who's applying for Medicaid and or the applicant's spouse. Anything that they see that may have been transferred out for less than fair market value, they will impose what's called a penalty, which we can get into shortly. But yes, it's not as simple as just getting below the $2,000 and now automatically, being qualifying financially. It's really making sure that you have the proof of how you got to that $2,000 with all the verification, with all the explanation of where did this money go, where did it come from, why did it go there, why did it come from there. So there's a lot of legwork that goes into that and gathering every single statement from the past 5 years. And it's not only about gathering, it's also about verifying and making sure that everything is clear and makes sense, because you always want to play offense when you're applying for Medicaid. You want to come to Medicaid with a story that, this $50,000 that you see leaving my account was for X, Y, and Z, and now it came back, 2 years later, here's the deposit for that. So you really want to make sure that you're well prepared for that as well. And getting back to your question of, okay, so somebody comes to us with, say, $50,000 or $100,000, we don't advise our clients on how to spend their money. We are not elder care attorneys. However, we do work with elder care attorneys, and there are ways to be able to preserve assets. And actually, because we have two goals when somebody retains our services. When we get a client, we have two goals. And they're both: number one is we want to get that individual Medicaid, and then at the same time, we also want to make sure that his or her spouse and or family are able to keep whatever they are entitled to. And that's why we do work with some other care attorneys, and when clients do sign up with senior planning, we strongly recommend them to speak with the attorney and to see what their options are. But as far as senior planning is concerned, to put it in simple terms, we are paper pushers. We're going out there, we're gathering all the 5 years of statements. We're reviewing all the 5 years of statements, making sure everything's prepared and reviewed prior to an application being submitted for application. So I know using that term makes it sound very simple, but it's really not.
No, paper pusher it's a difficult thing to do because there's a lot to do and there's a lot of boxes you got to check. So I definitely have a lot of respect for what you guys do. There are 2 points I want to pivot off of from what you just said. The look back penalties. This was something I didn't know. During that 5-year look back period, when they're looking through all your resources, they can look back and say, "Hey, you transferred $25,000 3 years ago. So you qualify for Medicaid, but there's a delay based on a certain dollar amount per day," correct? Can you shed some light on that?
Yes, sure. So, like I said, you need to submit the full 5-year history, and mind you, we're focusing specifically on the state of New Jersey, where New Jersey is extremely strict in ensuring that you are submitting every single document. They can and probably will deny you if you are missing documentation on the basis of missing documents. And that's why we cannot push it hard enough and really emphasize that the importance of getting this process started early on, as opposed to waiting till the day before you need it, because
Yeah.
it really does take a lot of time in ensuring that you're gathering every single document. So once you have your 5 years of statements, Medicaid will review every single financial statement line by line to see what everything was spent on. Now, officially, it's an unwritten rule that Medicaid doesn't look at anything under $500, or some people say $1,000. But we've seen a lot less than that, and they have the right to look at whatever they want and question whatever they want. So while they're going through these transactions, if they don't have a specific explanation on a transaction, they will mark it off in their books as a gift. In other words, you transferred assets for below fair market value. We're going to consider that as a gift. So say they go through the whole 5 years of statements. Now they tally up. We have $100,000 of unexplained expenditures. We don't know where it went. We're going to assume that you gave away that money. Medicaid says, okay, everything else looks good. We are going to approve you for Medicaid. However, there's going to be a lapse in coverage. And there's something called a penalty divisor rate, where Medicaid says, okay, we're going to put a number per day that you're not going to have Medicaid coverage. So today the exact number is $440.10. So they're going to take $100,000, divide that by $440.10, and now you're going to have approximately 227 days without coverage. So yes, you are on Medicaid, but you don't have a payer source. So picture your loved one in a skilled nursing facility where they're applying for Medicaid. Medicaid comes back with a $100,000 penalty. It's not going to be very pretty when that penalty comes back and now there's 227 days without coverage. So going back to my point before, where you want to play offense, many of these transactions can be explained. You may have to get verifications from other places, such as many times we see a child laying out money for their loved one in an assisted living or a skilled nursing facility because their mom or dad had money, but it was tied up in an IRA. And if they take out the money today, they were going to get penalized. If they wait another year, there's no penalty. So they figured, you know what, let me pay for these bills and then I'll pay myself back. And without just simply showing that, hey, look, I laid out $100,000 and now mom's paying me back, you could have just shown that and now you get rid of that penalty. So going back to what I was saying before, it's not only about gathering the 5 years of statements, but it's also ensuring that you have all the verifications and you're going through everything line by line and presenting it to Medicaid in the proper way.
Okay, so it comes down to this idea that not only do you have to gather all the documents, but Medicaid might look through and make an assumption that you can't start Medicaid for X amount of days, but in reality, if you have someone in your corner, you can potentially get that penalty much lower or eliminate it entirely.
Correct.
Yeah, that's great to hear. One thing I want to talk about too is when they're looking through your assets and looking through your money, there is countable and excludable resources. Can you dive a little bit into the difference between those two and why it's so important when this process starts?
Yeah, absolutely. So your countable resources are, and again, if we're focusing on a single individual, but I'll throw out there a spousal as well because I know many people get anxious about this piece. So we'll try to focus on a spousal as well. When I say spousal, I mean there's one of the spouses are in the skilled nursing facility and one of them is living at home. So, for example, their home is not going to be a countable resource if they're actually living, if that's their primary residence. But for the most part, countable resources, anything that has a cash value, and some exceptions to that is, for example, a life insurance policy. So there's two types of life insurance policies. There is something called a term policy, which means there is no cash value to it. There is only a death benefit. That's an exempt asset because there is no cash value. So Medicaid will never come after that life insurance policy. So even if John Doe got onto Medicaid today and Medicaid's been paying out for years, once John Doe passes away, if the beneficiary is John Doe's son, the son gets that life insurance policy. So that's an exempt asset. Now, there's another type of life insurance, which is called a whole policy, or some people call it a life policy. That Medicaid looks at what's called the face amount. So if you were to look at a life insurance policy, you'll see three values. You'll see a face amount, cash value, and a death benefit. Medicaid is looking at that face amount. If that face amount is below $1,500, then it's an exempt asset. If it's above $1,500, then it's not an exempt asset. That's something that's going to need to be cashed out. So, if the face amount is $2,000 and your cash benefit is $10,000 and your death benefit is $15,000, what we have seen many people do is, I know I'm jumping here a little bit, we've seen some people take that life insurance policy and set up a prepaid funeral with it. Because from my understanding, the funeral home would honor the $20,000 death benefit as opposed to the $15,000 cash value. But yes, that is something that's a countable resource if the face amount is above $1,500. Personal possessions is excludable, so if somebody has a diamond ring, she doesn't have to go ahead and sell that. Personal possessions is an excludable resource as well. A home, especially in a single individual, is a countable resource. However, Medicaid will not hold up the Medicaid process because they understand that you sometimes can't sell a home in a day. However, the home does need to be listed while you're applying for Medicaid and while you may be on Medicaid. And Medicaid does have the right to go ahead and put a lien on that home as well, which they probably will do. So long as they're paying for your care, they can go ahead and put a lien on that home as well. So basically, just to circle back to your question, countable resources is really anything that has a cash value for the most part. And excludable resources is personal possessions or things that don't currently have a cash value. Funeral, if you set up a prepaid funeral, again, it's important that that's irrevocable, which means you can never get the money back. If you set up a revocable funeral, then that is considered cash. It's a countable resource because it's accessible. So it really comes down to the point is it an accessible resource or not?
What exactly is a lien, and how does this factor in after the person on Medicaid passes away? Does the state start to claim money back if they saw that the costs were at a certain threshold or something like that?
So from what we have seen is, as like I said, if there is a single individual in the skilled nursing facility that has a home, the home needs to be listed, and then Medicaid will start putting a lien on that home. Generally speaking, the state doesn't come back for recovery until the home actually sells. However, on that note, Medicaid has been getting stricter. So basically the way it used to work was, even if you had a child living in that home and you listed it for sale, even if it wasn't selling, Medicaid was okay with that. However, Medicaid started really cracking down and really pushing for that sale to happen, and understandably so, because they're shelling out the cash for it and they want to get paid back. So generally speaking, the homes start moving quicker. But to answer your question, from what we have seen is Medicaid sits there until the home sells, and then that's when the state comes back for their money. And once you're once you're touching on the topic of homes, and that's a big part where we really suggest and push our clients to speak with the elder care attorneys that we work with, is because there are scenarios where, besides for the regular asset preservation, there are also scenarios where if there was a child living in the home, that they may be able to keep it. And that's definitely, usually that's considered a big asset when somebody does own a home. So it's definitely a situation where we strongly encourage to speak to them with the attorneys that we work with.
Okay, so someone could have a lien, and the elder care attorney can help fight that, but
no, not necessarily fight the lien, but preserve some of the assets that do remain in the home.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. But depending on what bills you accrue while on Medicaid, your estate could potentially, after the fact, take a hit, and the state could ask for money from the estate.
Absolutely.
How does that process work? Does it happen? This might be more of a legal problem, so if you can't comment, no worries. But does it start to pop up in probate court? Is it after the death? Like, how exactly does that transfer of assets happen after the fact?
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with the post-death state recovery. I'll leave that
Yeah,
to the legal team.
no problem. We have a elder care attorney coming on in 3 weeks, so look out for that episode. We'll talk about it. We were talking during our little break about income, and I think income is something people really stress during this Medicaid process. What can you tell us about the income requirements when you're trying to go on to Medicaid?
Yes, so we get that all the time where, people, we speak with individuals and they're like, oh, we don't qualify for Medicaid because my income is too high. There's no such thing. You do qualify for Medicaid. However, and this is one of those myths out there, there is a threshold that Medicaid does have that somebody would need what's called a qualified income trust, otherwise known as the Miller Trust. And that threshold is $2,829. So as I mentioned before, when somebody is in let's just use a skilled nursing facility for example, say they get $2,000 of income every month. That income goes to the nursing home and then Medicaid fills the gap. However, there are two things that can be deducted from their income. Number one, many individuals have a supplement insurance. So for example, they may have, Blue Cross Blue Shield paying $379 a month. They can continue to pay that $379 a month out of their income. And then some people may ask, well, if I have Medicaid as a secondary, then why do I need Blue Cross Blue Shield? And the answer to that is that some doctors don't take Medicaid as a secondary, and you're really not losing anything because, let's just call it $350 a month for that supplement insurance. That $350 is either going to go to the supplement insurance company or it's going to go to the skilled nursing facility. And the skilled nursing facility doesn't care because either you're going to give them that $350 or Medicaid is going to give them that $350. And Medicaid doesn't care because Medicaid is always the payer of last resort. So if you had an additional insurance prior to Medicaid, they're actually thrilled with that. So, again, we never advise our clients what to do, but we just break it down for them, and then most people can take it from there and say, hey, it's a no-brainer. We might as well keep it. So that's one thing that you can deduct from your income. Another thing that you can deduct from your income is something called PNA, Personal Needs Allowance. Every applicant, every resident in a skilled nursing facility is entitled to $50 a month. I know it's not a whole lot of money, but besides for the $2,000 that they get to keep in their account prior to becoming eligible, they can also keep $50 a month in a skilled nursing facility. If they're in an assisted living facility, that number is $140.15. So after you deduct the supplement insurance, you deduct the PNA, then the remainder of that goes to the skilled nursing facility. So that's the way it works if your income is below the $2,829. If your income is above the $2,829, it just gets a bit more complex where you need to set up a separate account, which is called the QIT, Qualified Income Trust, and one of your checks need to go in there on a monthly basis, and then from there to the skilled nursing facility that you're in. So for example, if you get a $2,000 Social Security check, a $1,000 pension check, you are above the $2,829. You need to deposit one of those checks every month into the QIT, and then from there to the skilled nursing facility. You cannot just take the excess amount that you are over. It needs to be a complete amount of one of those checks. So it just makes the process a little more complex, and it gives, quite frankly, Medicaid another way to deny your case if it's not being done properly. So it's just another nuance and another loophole that you have to, not a loophole, another thing that you have to jump through to make sure that it's being done properly and making sure that you're actually qualifying, you're funding that QIT on a monthly basis. For any month that you don't fund that QIT, Medicaid can deny. So it's something that you really want to be careful about and making sure that you're on top of.
Yeah, it's great to hear that the supplemental is exempt from all this because a lot of people don't realize that Medicare itself, in most cases, doesn't cover skilled nursing facilities or long term care facilities past a certain point. Let's dive into some spousal scenarios. I know one of the things you mentioned earlier is one spouse is healthy, the other needs long term care. What are some spousal scenarios you walk people through? Because it seems like it can get a little more complicated when you're not single.
Yes, absolutely. And this is something that we stress all the time with, especially in spousal scenarios where you have, like I said, the healthy spouse is living out there in the community, just paying their bill every month on a, private bill, which can be very costly. And in their mind, they're thinking, oh, we still have plenty of money, so I'm just going to keep paying. I'm too prejudiced to apply for Medicaid for my husband. And it's very sad because many times they are spending more money than they need to. Even without, like I said before, we always suggest these individuals to speak with elder care attorneys that we work with, because especially in spousal scenarios, there are ways to preserve assets. But even if you don't go there, just with the Medicaid rules and guidelines, a spouse can keep up to $154,140. Now, there's something called a snapshot, which could get complex. I don't know if I'm going to go into all that right now, but the bottom line is that many times they may have $100,000 left in the bank, and they're thinking, oh, we still have plenty of money. We don't qualify for Medicaid yet, and that can be the furthest thing from the truth. So we always push. Number one is get educated. It doesn't, we offer everybody a free Medicaid education and consultation. It doesn't cost you a penny to get educated. And it's very sad to see so many people spending so much more money than they actually need to. So yes, there's the minimum, there's the maximum that a spouse can keep. There are times where the spouse living in the community can even keep some of his or her spouse's income, depending on what her income is, depending on what her cost to live every month is. It's very important to get educated and get the full understanding of what a spouse can keep and what a spouse needs to spend.
Yeah, that's great information. I think education is key. It's what we do with Medicare as well, because just one or 2 hour consultation can be the pivot in your life that saves you literally tens of thousands of dollars over the course of your lifetime. It's pretty crazy.
I always say the biggest anxiety, the reason why people have the most anxiety is because of the unknown. They don't know what to expect. They don't know what it is. And when you have opportunity to get educated, and you don't even have to ask us the questions. We know what questions to answer to you before you even asked us. We're asking the questions for you, and we're giving you the answer. So yes, it's extremely important to get educated on the process. And it's never too early. Even if you don't actually need Medicaid today, it's never too early to actually get educated.
Yeah, I actually talked to an elder care attorney this week who said that, believe it or not, the time to get started planning your estate and planning things like this is when you turn 18, because that's when you suddenly, you might not know it, but you don't have people who have power of attorney over you. Your parents don't automatically have power over you. So when you turn 18, that's the time to start this journey. It might be an 80-year journey, but very long way. All right. Well, this has all been amazing information, Michael. Thank you so much for spending the time to talk about Medicaid. Like you said, it is a very anxiety-inducing time and a very emotional time. So the fact that you all can come in and give guidance and give expertise is awesome. If someone is looking to reach you and your firm, how can they find you, and what does the process usually look like when they first reach out?
Sure. So, like I said, we start everybody off with free Medicaid education and consultation. It's not necessarily a one-time free consultation. They can call us back as many times with some additional questions. Sometimes we speak with one individual in the family, and now they want to conference in 3-4 siblings, so we're totally fine with that. We educate everybody. Once we're done with the free consultation, we will explain to them our services, what we can do for them. If they would like to move forward, we set up an appointment with a Medicaid specialist to come out and meet with them. And all we ask the families to provide to us is whatever they have. So if all you have is mom's Medicare card and that's it, that is fine. Once you retain senior planning, we assume the full responsibility to do everything for you. So we gather all the necessary documentation. We go directly to the financial institutions, get the 5 years of statements. We review it, making sure everything is clear, self-explanatory, and kind of doing the Medicaid caseworker job for them, where we want to come to Medicaid with a complete file, with all the verifications, showing where everything went to, where it came from, with all the explanations. So it's really taking that big burden off the family's shoulders and allowing them to focus on their loved ones. And our fee actually comes out of their spend down. So, if John Doe has $50,000 left, in order for him to actually qualify, he needs to get down below the 2,000. This is something that he is allowed to use part of those funds for. Which is really nice for families as well, because it just means they're going to pay one less month of private pay, and it really removes the burden off their shoulder, puts them at peace of mind. So they can reach out to us. Either they can email us info at seniorplanning.com, or they can call our toll-free number 855-775-2664. And like I said, the consultation is always free.
Awesome. And you guys are based in Lakewood, New Jersey. I know New Jersey is what we talked about primarily, but are you available in any other states?
Yes. I'm sorry. They could also go to our website, www.seniorplanning.com. Yes, we're actually currently in 15 states, but just for this area, I guess, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Virginia. We're growing, and so if you have a loved one, if somebody has a loved one in a state that I didn't mention, you can give us a call, because there's a good chance that we got there by the time you called us. But yes, we're growing and expanding. We did start in New Jersey about 15 years ago. And I will say that out of the 15 states that we are in today, New Jersey is the most difficult and the most tedious state when it comes to Medicaid. So it's definitely something that you want to start early in preparing for, and making sure that you have your ducks lined up.
Awesome. Well, Michael, this is all amazing information. Even us in the Medicare space are often, stressed by how intense the Medicaid process can be. So thank you for shedding some light and sharing your expertise. So I will link all their information below, guys, in case you want to reach out to them. But thanks again, Michael, for coming on and talking retirement.
And thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right.